Welcome to digital worship. It is so good to be together on this holiest of days. It really is good to gather on this day.
It is good now to be together. And what I'm trying to think about this Christmas Eve day is to stay focused on what Christmas is really about. It's so easy to be distracted. We all know what Christmas is about. It's a celebration of Jesus. And the story itself reminds us, the birth stories, reminds us about his whole life and ministry and his teachings. It's amazing how the story itself prefigures the adult life that would follow. So for example, at the birth of this baby, the gentleness of that scene, and that harkens to the gentleness of the adult Jesus and his compassion. He was the one that said, "Blessed are the gentle ones, blessed are the meek." It's as if the whole story sets up what he is about. In the story when it says there's no room at the inn, well, that harkens to when the adult Jesus says, "I have nowhere to lay my head," in his itinerant ministry through the villages. Or when the angels at the birth scene are saying peace and goodwill to all. Certainly he was all about peace and goodwill, but those angels in essence reappear and minister to him after the temptation in the desert. It's all sort of foreshadowing, like the evil King Herod that is trying to kill the young baby Jesus and they're trying to escape to Egypt and such. Well, that clearly foreshadows that indeed he'll face death at the hands of the rulers. Of course, the adult Jesus didn't run away from that. Ultimately, he walked into it in faith, knowing there was a purpose. Or even the shepherds in the birth story that surround Jesus, they seem to me to represent his life with the marginalized, those who are struggling, the poor. It's as if the Christmas story is making sure we stay laser focused on what Jesus was about. And I hope we can have a discussion today more about Christmas and more about Jesus. But first, let's begin with a song.
For it is the God who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ.
On this fourth week in Advent, we light the candle of love and remember the candles of hope, peace, and joy. As we anticipate the birth of Jesus, open our eyes to the signs of your love all around us.
Gracious God, visit us and reveal to us your unending love. May the birth of your Son, Emmanuel, give us the courage to carry your light into the shadows of this world, to love one another as you love us. Amen.
You mentioned earlier about these episodes, right, in Jesus' life, how they foreshadow. So one of them that I've been thinking a lot about is that an episode that you described where there's no place for them in the inn. And there's this beautiful ritual around Christmas time from Mexico called Las Posadas.
Oh, yeah.
Las Posadas is a way to reenact that moment in Jesus' life. So folks gather and someone plays Mary and Joseph, and they go from house to house, knocking. And the question is, where is there room for Jesus, right? And of course, like in the story at the beginning, there's no room. And the crowd continues to get larger as they go from house to house. Will there be a place for Jesus? And then, lo and behold, someone does indeed open the house. And there's a huge feast that awaits them in that place. And all of a sudden, it goes from this moment of struggle and sadness, not knowing what's going to happen, to this moment of fiesta, feasting that takes place. And so I've been thinking a lot about in my own life, how am I making room? How am I making room in my own life? How am I making room among my neighbors? You know, I should probably knock on doors more often in my own neighborhood, because the reality of it is that this early story tells us something about Jesus' life. One of the things it tells us is that we meet Jesus in unexpected places, and often in the places we least expect. So I'm curious this Christmas, how am I going to make room for those unexpected encounters with this divine child that's appearing all around me? If I just pay attention, if I just knock on the door, I'm wondering if I will encounter Jesus this year. Is my heart opened enough for that encounter with love?
Boy, if we imagine that any encounter that we have in life might become an encounter with the Christ, how more gentle our hearts would be, how more expectant for a moment of love. So you hear a lot, from various preachers around the country about how we got to get Christ back in Christmas.
Oh, goodness, yes.
You hear that a lot. What I've been thinking about this week is I feel at times we need more Christ in Christianity. That there's so many beautiful different forms of Christianity. And in fact, this week I imagine all those different types of Christian groups all gathering around the manger. And so there's a moment of incredible unity if we were focused on Christ. But I wonder, in what ways is each separate form of Christianity needing to be healed almost by the Christ presence?
Yeah.
Because there's things that are beautiful about every tradition or different Christian group, and then there are things that maybe aren't as Christ-like.
Right.
And so as I think through the groups, and I mean this in the most gentle way, the Roman Catholic Church, for example, so many beautiful things about it. The ritual and the deep majesty of the Roman Catholic faith. But I imagine also that at times they fall into patriarchy and dogmatism and might bringing more Christ, that gentleness, that sense of equality of souls. Might the patriarchy of an institutional church be healed by that? Or I think of evangelicals that that have such a beautiful, heartfelt expression of faith in Jesus, but then at times it can look like it becomes too political or forms of Christian nationalism. Where if more Christ was present, it would never be about nations. It would be more about the universal family. Well, I wonder about our own tradition.
Yeah.
We're called liberal mainline Protestants. And there's beautiful things about our tradition, the sense of intellect and the openness and the focus on justice and such. But I wonder at times, do we lose our zeal and intense experience of the Christ himself and revel in that enough? I'm just trying to imagine ways different Christian groups, as we're surrounding the manger, might be healed by him. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I kept on thinking about, I think, so in this season, we have an opportunity in some ways to practice this. So what does it mean for Christians to be a people who are committed and rehearsing love with one another? So what you're saying is to get in touch with a deeper thing other than the labels we might take on for ourselves. In our own tradition, sometimes we can get too heady, for example, and not allow for the heart. Sometimes too, we might confuse justice for Jesus. And we sometimes, in our own tradition, then find ourselves kind of living into some stereotypes also. So what I hear you is, how can we, in this season that's already reflective, that slows us down a little bit, how can we then say, how can we be love incarnate in the world? It sounds easy, but you and I both know the human condition is such that it's a lot harder. We want to be love in the world, but it's a lot harder. So I'm thinking, as you talk, I'm wondering, so what's this? Often in sermons I say, here's one thing. And so what would be one thing that you would invite us into so that we can be love in the world? Like, I'm just thinking out of the top of my head, not sure yet, but what's one thing where we can then leave the labels behind, leave the stereotypes behind, if Christians are to be Christ-like?
That one thing is Christ.
Yeah.
At least in my imagination. Like, I love that there are over 200 Christian denominations in America. I love that diversity, and each brings a special witness. I celebrate that.
Yeah.
But this could be a moment of a deeper spiritual unity that releases that love, because we're all gathered around Christ this week.
Yeah, it's like shepherds and gather, and angels gather, and there's these animals in this manger that gather, and there's Mary and there's Joseph, and in the ancient story we collapse these stories together, so we even bring wise ones into the mix. You're in some way saying, can we all just gather around this Jesus Christ?
Yeah, it's a manger menagerie.
Yes, and in spite of all the differences that can be there, language differences and differences in ways of thinking, you're saying, can we together as Christians commit to gathering around Jesus Christ and allowing that vision to inspire us?
And I'm thinking about a little theological point too that inspires me. I know a lot of American Christianity focuses so intensely on his sacrificial death as the atoning sacrifice that saves us. But I know that there's some ancient traditions in the Christian church that actually focused more on the incarnation as that moment that brought God and humanity together. Not as much the cross. The cross was still understood to be part of a whole process, but there was an ancient church father that said, God became human so that humans could become God.
Oscar Romero, over Sábado.
He said that too? Because I was thinking of Irenaeus. So they share sentences re-speak themselves through the ages. But this idea that it's the incarnation, the birth of Jesus, God becoming human, that's what brings this separation, this gulf that we can experience between God and humanity. That's what brings it together. And so I want to fully revel in that theological fact. There's an atonement this day when Christ is born, an at-one-ment.
At-one-ment.
Does that make sense?
Dios se convirtió en hombre para que el hombre se convierta en Dios. God became human so that humans can. So I love that idea of us in some ways reclaiming what the ancient church called deification, right? Transformation. I'm a former United Methodist, right? So in Wesleyan,
sanctification.
Yeah, in Wesleyan theology, sanctification. I'm wondering too if we focus on Christ, if we focus on this incarnation, if we focus on this divine life, it also helps us often leave behind some of the things. We tend to so hyper-focus on things that divide us. What I hear you saying once again is you're trying to help all of us think about things that unite us, things that we can gather around, things that help us shed our hyper-focus on ourselves.
That's right. And I think the incarnation focuses more on that incarnate divinity in each person to live it out now, whereas sometimes the cross and resurrection seems to focus in the afterlife.
Oh, yeah.
But this moment is bringing it down to earth.
Yeah, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us.
Among us.
That's like a today kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, as we end our time together, is there any other thoughts about Christmas that you have?
I don't know. I think for me, it's a hope for our folk. So my hope for you is that you will experience Christ in a special way this season. That you allow that love to come into. I know life is hard sometimes, but in these days, may you experience that love in bountiful, abundant, overflowing ways as we gather together and as we continue to support one another in this life of ours.
And I'm celebrating that this is the one moment that the widespread culture and the church are perfectly aligned, this celebration moment, because Christmas is such a cultural holiday as well. Well, I don't think that's a problem. I think it can add to the joy. All of this brought together, so in any way that your family is gathering, any way that you've been at parties and been around friends, all that's the joy as we surround Christ.
So, may Christ be with you today and in the days to come.